The chrome on Ryder's handlebars gleamed with a predatory light, catching the afternoon sun as his Harley-Davidson rumbled down the quiet suburban street. This was his escape. The endless asphalt, the rhythmic thunder of the engine, the wind that stripped away the noise of command, of being the president of the Serpent's Crest Hell's Angels Charter. Here, he wasn't a leader. He was just a man on a machine, chasing a horizon that never got any closer. But today, the horizon was interrupted. He saw her from a block away, a small, stooped figure battling against the weight of the world, contained within two overflowing grocery bags. He slowed the bike, the engine dropping to a low, guttural growl that turned heads in the manicured yards. She was old, her hair a wispy crown of white, her coat thin despite the crisp autumn air. Each step was a monumental effort. One of the paper bags tore slightly at the bottom, and a can of peaches made a bid for freedom, rolling into the gutter with a hollow clang. The woman, whose name he would learn was Agnes, let out a soft, defeated sigh that the wind carried directly to him. It was a sound he knew all too well. It was the sound of surrender. He pulled the bike to the curb, the engine's roar dying into a series of metallic clicks as he killed the ignition. Silence descended, thick and sudden. He swung a leather-clad leg over the seat, his heavy boots making a solid thud on the pavement. He was a large man, built like a mountain with tattoos that snaked from beneath his cuffs and up his neck, a roadmap of a life lived hard. He knew how he looked to people in neighborhoods like this, a monster loose from its cage. He saw the flicker of fear in her eyes as he approached, her grip tightening on the compromised bags. She took a half-step back, her body tensing. He stopped a respectful 10 feet away, holding up his hands in a gesture of peace. "Ma'am," he said, his voice a low rumble, sanded rough by whiskey and road dust. "Looks like you could use a hand." She stared at him, her gaze darting from his patched leather vest, the death's head grinning from his back, to the intricate ink on his knuckles. Fear warred with exhaustion on her face. I'm all right," she stammered, the words thin and unconvincing. He took another slow step forward. "No disrespect, but that can of peaches in the gutter says otherwise. Let me help you. Just to your door." He gestured down the street. "It's no trouble." He didn't wait for another refusal. He walked past her, bent down, and plucked the can from the gutter, wiping it on his jeans. When he turned back, he saw it. As she shifted her grip on the bags, her sleeve rode up just an inch. On the pale, fragile skin of her wrist was a constellation of bruises, a sickening galaxy of purple and yellow, shaped distinctly like fingers. Her eyes followed his, and she yanked her sleeve down with a panicked motion, her face flushing with shame. The air crackled. The quiet suburban street, with its perfect lawns and smiling mailboxes, suddenly felt like a lie. A beautifully constructed facade over something rotten. Ryder's entire posture changed. The casual offer of help solidified into a cold, hard resolve. This was no longer about a can of peaches. His mind flashed with an unwanted memory, a ghost that rode shotgun on every solo trip. His younger sister, Sarah, years ago, with a similar bruise on her cheek she tried to hide with makeup, insisting she just walked into a door he'd believed her. He'd chosen to believe her because it was easier. It was a mistake he'd paid for every day since. He would not make it again. "My name is Ryder," he said, his voice softer now, but with an undercurrent of steel. "Let me carry these for you." Please, he didn't frame it as a question this time. He gently took the bags from her hands. Her fingers were icy cold, and for a moment they brushed against his. He was struck by how frail she felt, like a bird with a broken wing. She finally relented, her shoulders slumping as if a great weight had been lifted, and not just the groceries. She nodded, her gaze fixed on the pavement. "Agnes," she whispered. "My name is Agnes," he nodded back. "Agnes." He cradled the heavy bags in his arms as if they were made of glass. "Lead the way." They walked in silence, the only sound his boots on the concrete and her soft, shuffling footsteps. The house was another 2 blocks down, a handsome 2-story brick building with a meticulously kept garden. It looked like a postcard of suburban bliss. But as they got closer, Ryder's eyes, trained to see things others missed, picked up the details. The expensive-looking security cameras aimed not just outward, but at the porch and back door. The decorative but sturdy iron grills on the ground floor windows. It wasn't a home secured against intruders. It was a prison. Agnes fumbled in her pocket for a key, her hands trembling so much she dropped it. Ryder bent down and picked it up, his large, tattooed fingers dwarfing the small piece of metal. He unlocked the door and pushed it open for her. "I can take them to the kitchen for you," he offered. "No." The word was sharp, panicked. Her eyes widened in genuine terror. "No, thank you. This is fine. My nephew will be home soon. He doesn't like visitors." The lie was so transparent, it was painful. The fear radiating from her was a physical force. Ryder's jaw tightened. "Nephew." He placed the bags just inside the doorway, his gaze sweeping the interior. It was clean, sterile, and joyless. There were no photos on the walls, no knickknacks on the shelves, none of the clutter that makes a house a home. It felt like a showroom, cold and impersonal. "All right, Agnes," he said, keeping his voice even. "You have a good day." She wouldn't meet his eyes. "Thank you," she mumbled to the floor. As he turned to leave, he paused. "If you ever need anything," he said, his voice dropping low, a private promise between them. "I mean anything at all. Just tie something red to your back gate." "Anything at all." She looked up then, a flicker of confusion and something else, a tiny, terrified spark of hope in her watery blue eyes. She gave a jerky, almost imperceptible nod. Ryder walked back to his bike. The image of her bruised wrist burned into his mind. The quiet ride was over. The thunder wasn't just in his engine anymore. It was building in his chest. He swung his leg back over the Harley, the leather creaking in protest. He fired up the engine, and this time, the roar wasn't one of freedom. It was a declaration of war. He knew, with a certainty that settled deep in his bones, that he would be back. This quiet street was about to get a whole lot louder. The town had no idea what was coming, but for one old woman trapped in a silent prison, a lone Hell's Angel had just become her only chance, and he was a man who never abandoned a fight. The clubhouse, known as the chapel, smelled of stale beer, old leather, and engine oil, the holy trinity of the Serpent's Crest charter. It was a scent Ryder usually found comforting, the smell of home. Tonight, it felt suffocating. He sat at the head of the heavy oak table, a bottle of whiskey untouched before him, the image of Agnes's face, pale and frightened, superimposed over the room's familiar chaos. The other members gave him a wide berth. They knew this mood. This was the quiet before Ryder unleashed a storm. Grizz, his sergeant-at-arms, and a man whose bearish frame and grizzled beard had earned him his road name, pulled up a chair opposite him. Grizz was the only one who could approach Ryder in this state. Their bond was forged in blood and miles, a brotherhood deeper than DNA. "Spit it out, Prez," Grizz said, his voice a low grumble. "You've been staring at that bottle like it personally insulted your mother. What did you see out there?" Ryder finally looked up, his eyes hard. An old woman, carrying groceries, had bruises on her wrist. The kind that don't come from a fall. Grizz leaned forward, his jovial demeanor evaporating. He'd seen Ryder like this before once, years ago, and Ryder recounted the entire encounter, his words clipped and precise. The torn bag, the fear in her eyes, the house that looked more like a fortress, the cold and empty interior, her panicked reaction when he offered to come inside. He described the lie about her nephew. It felt wrong, Grizz. All of it. The whole damn street felt like a movie set, and she was the only one who didn't know her lines. Grizz ran a hand through his thick beard, considering. Could be nothing, old folks bruise easy. Maybe the nephew is just a prick about strangers. Some people are. No, Ryder said, the word final. He slammed his hand on the table, making the whiskey bottle jump. The noise silenced the low chatter in the rest of the bar. It was the look in her eye. The same damn look Sarah had. The name hung in the air between them, heavy and cold. Sarah, Ryder's sister, the ghost he couldn't outrun. A sudden, vivid flashback seized him, sharp and unwelcome. He was 25 again, cocky and full of himself, too wrapped up in club business to see what was happening right in front of him. Sarah, with her bright laugh and fierce spirit, had started dating a slick real estate developer, a man with a charming smile and empty eyes. Ryder had disliked him on sight, but had said nothing, not wanting to be the overbearing older brother. Then came the first excuse for a bruise, a fall down the stairs, then another. Walked into a door, he saw her spirit dimming, her laughter fading, but he'd accepted the lies. He'd let his own discomfort, his own unwillingness to confront the ugly truth, put her in danger. The last time he saw her alive, she'd called him, her voice a tiny whisper. "Ryder, can you come get me?" He'd been in the middle of a charter meeting, a dispute over territory. "Can it wait, Sarah? I'm busy." The memory was a physical blow, stealing his breath. It could never wait. By the time he'd gotten there, it was too late. The developer had lost the deal, taken out on her, and then fled. Ryder had found her. That single image, her broken on the floor of her perfect apartment, was the demon that rode his back, the fuel for his cold, righteous fury. He had hunted the man down himself, a brutal cross-country chase that ended in a dark alley in Chicago. Justice had been served, but had brought no peace. It had only carved a deeper hole inside him. He snapped back to the present, his knuckles white around the whiskey bottle. He looked at Grizz, his eyes burning with a guilt that never cooled. "I told myself I would never be too busy again, brother. Never again." Grizz's expression softened with a deep, shared pain. He had been there for the aftermath, had held Ryder up at the funeral, had been the one to clean the blood from his friend's knuckles after Chicago. He knew this wasn't just about a stranger. This was about redemption. "All right," Grizz said, his voice firm, a rock in Ryder's storm. "What's the address?" Ryder told him. "We're not going in loud. Not yet. This nephew, if he's the one doing it, he's got her scared into silence. We go in like a freight train. She might clam up, try to protect him. Abusers are smart like that. They poison the well. So what's the play?" Grizz asked, leaning in, his mind already shifting to tactics. "We watch," Ryder declared. "We park the van. We do surveillance. I want to know who this nephew is. I want to know his routine. I want to see how he treats her when he thinks no one is looking. We gather proof. We build a case our way. And when we have what we need, we're going to tear his whole world down around him. And we're going to do it so quietly he won't hear it coming until the walls are already on top of him." Grizz nodded, a grim smile touching his lips. He loved a good plan, especially one that involved righteous vengeance. "Need me to grab Rat?" Rat was their tech guy, a wiry, nervous genius who could hack into a bank account with a burner phone and a half-eaten bag of chips. His skills were legendary and usually reserved for club business. "Not yet," Ryder said. "First, we get eyes on. Just you and me. Tonight, I want to see this nephew for myself." He finally picked up the whiskey bottle, but not to drink. He screwed the cap on tight. "I need a clear head for this." He stood up, his towering frame casting a long shadow across the room. He walked towards the door, grabbing his leather jacket. "Let's go to work." Grizz stood with him, a loyal bulldog at his master's side. "Just say the word, Prez. We'll burn that whole damn neighborhood to the ground for her. We will," Ryder promised, his voice a low growl. "But we're going to do it with gasoline. He gives us himself." As they left the chapel, the rumbling of their engines was a promise. For Agnes, trapped behind her pretty prison walls, help was coming. It wasn't coming with a siren and flashing lights. It was coming with the quiet, patient fury of men who understood that some monsters don't live under the bed. They have a key to the front door. The scales of justice were about to be balanced, not by a court of law, but by the unwavering code of the Hells Angels. The surveillance van was a relic, a beat-up Ford Econoline that smelled faintly of stale coffee and righteous indignation. It was the club's unofficial rolling command center, nondescript enough to blend into any suburban backdrop. Ryder and Grizz sat inside, parked 3 houses down from Agnes's prison, the perfect vantage point. The afternoon sun had given way to the bruised purple of twilight, and streetlights flickered on, casting long, dancing shadows. They had been there for 3 hours, a lifetime in biker minutes. Grizz was getting restless, drumming his fingers on the dashboard. You sure this is the right play, Ree? We could just knock on the door, have a little chat with this nephew fella, and he'll what? Confess, Ryder retorted, his eyes never leaving the house through a pair of high-powered binoculars. He'll smile, call us thugs, and then call the cops. Then he'll take it out on her for bringing us there. This has to be clean. It has to be airtight. Ryder's patience was a weapon, honed over years of navigating inter-club politics and rival gang tensions. He knew when to wait. Just as Grizz opened his mouth to complain again, a sleek, black Mercedes sedan pulled silently into the driveway of Agnes's house. The license plate was customized, V1CDOR. Showtime, Ryder murmured, focusing the binoculars. A man emerged from the driver's side. He was the picture of success. Tailored suit, expensive watch, a haircut that cost more than Grizz's boots. He had a politician's smile plastered on his face as he waved to a neighbor watering their lawn. This was Victor. Ryder zoomed in on his face. The smile didn't reach his eyes. They were cold, flat, like a shark's. Looks like a real pillar of the community, Grizz snorted with derision. Probably on the board of some charity for orphans he secretly despises, Victor unlocked the front door and went inside. For a few minutes, nothing happened. Then, the silence was shattered. Even from their position down the street, they could hear the muffled but distinct sound of Victor's voice, raised in anger. The tone was sharp, accusatory. Ryder reached for the listening device Rat had jury-rigged, a parabolic microphone that looked like a satellite dish from a dollhouse. He pointed it toward an open upstairs window. The sound came through the attached headphones, tinny but clear. Absolutely ridiculous. Do you know how much this costs? Victor's voice was venomous, dripping with condescension. You're wasting money we don't have. Peaches? In syrup? The doctor said no sugar, you senile old woman. Agnes's reply was a faint, trembling murmur, too soft to make out the words. Don't you talk back to me. Victor roared. I feed you, I put a roof over your head, and this is the gratitude I get? You're a burden, you know that? A constant, draining burden. If you're not careful, the stay-at-home will start looking real good. You think you're scared now? You have no idea. A door slammed, cutting off the sound. Ryder slowly lowered the microphone, his face a mask of stone. The muscle in his jaw jumped. Grizz looked at him, his own face dark with fury. That's it, Grizz growled, his hand instinctively going to the door handle of the van. Plan's over. Let's go now, Ryder commanded, his voice dangerously quiet. He put a hand on Grizz's arm, his grip like iron. This is exactly what we need. This is the gasoline. He felt the old rage bubbling up, the same helpless fury he'd felt when he'd found Sarah. He wanted to storm that house, to feel Victor's bones break under his fists. But Sarah's ghost whispered in his ear. Rage is easy. Justice is hard. He had to be smarter this time. For Agnes. He just threatened her, Grizz seethed. He called her a burden. And now we have it on tape, Ryder said, tapping the small digital recorder attached to the listening device. This is the beginning. We need more. We need to show a pattern. We need to dismantle his whole life, not just give him a black eye. He needs to lose everything. His money, his reputation, his freedom. He needs to feel as small and helpless as he makes her feel. They sat in silence for another hour. The lights in the house went on and off in a controlled sequence. Then, Victor emerged from the house, back in his crisp suit, smile firmly back in place. He got into his Mercedes and drove away, likely off to some charity dinner where he would wax poetic about family values. He's leaving her alone? Grizz asked, confused. Worse, Ryder said, his eyes scanning the house. He's locking her in. He pointed the binoculars at the front door. A moment after Victor left, a deadbolt, clearly visible from their angle, slid into place with an audible thunk that seemed to echo down the unnaturally quiet street. It was a smart lock, controlled remotely. He had locked her in from his car. That son of a bitch, Grizz breathed. It's not a home, Grizz. I told you. It's a cage. A very pretty, very expensive cage. Ryder felt a grim satisfaction. This was the proof he needed. The verbal abuse, the control, the imprisonment. But still wasn't enough. Men like Victor were masters of manipulation. They could twist anything. Ryder needed something undeniable. something that would utterly destroy Victor's carefully crafted image. "All right," Ryder said, turning to Grizz. "Now you can call Rat. Tell him I need a full financial workup on a Mr. Victor Sterling. I want to know where every penny he has comes from. I want to see his credit cards, his bank accounts, his secret stashes. I have a feeling our pillar of the community is hollow on the inside." Grizz pulled out his phone, a grin spreading across his face. This was the part he loved. The hunt. "You got it, boss. By sunrise, we'll know how many pairs of socks he owns and what he paid for them." As Grizz made the call, Ryder kept his eyes on the house. A single light was on in an upstairs window, a pale, lonely square against the encroaching darkness. He imagined Agnes in there, alone, hungry, and afraid. He thought of the small piece of red cloth he'd told her to use as a signal. It was a long shot, a desperate hope. But in his world, desperate hope was often the only kind that mattered. He settled in for a long night. The war had begun, not with a bang, but with a whisper of abuse caught on a wire, and the silent promise of a brotherhood that was now fully engaged. Victor Sterling had just made an enemy of the Hells Angels. He just didn't know it yet. His whole world was balanced on a knife's edge, and Ryder was about to kick it over. The next 24 hours were a masterclass in the Serpent's Crest unique brand of information warfare. While Ryder and Grizz maintained their vigil in the van, rotating shifts to keep their eyes on Agnes's house, Rat worked his digital magic from the back room of the chapel. The information started to flow in a torrent of encrypted texts. Victor Sterling wasn't just a pillar of the community. He was a monument to fraud. Rat, whose real name was Kevin, but who hadn't been called that in a decade, peeled back the layers of Victor's life with surgical precision. The sleek Mercedes was leased. The expensive suits were bought on a credit card that was perpetually maxed out. The handsome house wasn't his. It was Agnes's, inherited from her late husband, fully paid off. Got him a text from Rat read at 3 a.m. He's got a gambling problem. Big one. Owes 6 figures to a bookie in the city. The nasty kind. Ryder read the text aloud to Grizz, who whistled low. "That explains the desperation," Grizz said, sipping lukewarm coffee from a thermos. "So where's he getting the money to stay afloat?" The answer came an hour later, and it was a gut punch. Red had gained access to Agnes's bank records. Her pension checks, her Social Security payments, they were all direct deposited into an account that Victor had sole access to. He had systematically drained her life savings, a nest egg of over $200,000 over the past 3 years. What was left was a pittance. He was bleeding her dry, using her money to pay off his debts and maintain his facade of wealth, while she was left to subsist on scraps inside her own home. "He didn't just put her in a cage," Ryder said, his voice a low, dangerous growl. "He's selling the bars for scrap." He felt a fresh wave of fury, cold and sharp. This wasn't just abuse. It was a slow, methodical execution of her life, her security, her dignity. He looked through the binoculars. The house was dark and silent. He pictured Agnes inside, and his resolve hardened into something unbreakable. The plan had to be flawless. During the day, they watched Victor's routine. He left at 8 a.m. sharp, returned at noon for exactly 30 minutes, during which time they heard him berating Agnes for not cleaning the kitchen to his satisfaction, and then left again until evening. During that 30-minute window, he brought her a single, sad-looking sandwich and a glass of water. It was rationing. He was controlling her through hunger. "We need to get her out," Grizz said, his voice tight with frustration. "We can't just sit here and watch this." "We will, brother. But we need to do it right," Ryder insisted. "We need a signal. I can't just break down the door. He'll have the cops here in a second, and she's so terrified. She might even take his side, tell them we're intruders. I gave her a way to ask for help. We have to trust she'll use it." It was a huge risk. He was asking a woman who had been systematically broken down to perform an act of immense courage. He was betting on the flicker of hope he'd seen in her eyes. The waiting was agony. It gnawed at him, a constant reminder of his past failure. "I'm Busa Sara." The words echoed in his head. He wouldn't be busy this time. He would wait an eternity if he had to. That afternoon, Rat sent another update. This one was the nail in Victor's coffin. Victor, as Agnes's financial advisor, had taken out a reverse mortgage on her house without her knowledge, forging her signature. The paperwork was set to be finalized in 3 days. He was about to cash out the last and greatest asset she had, leaving her with nothing but debt. Once the money was in his account, he would likely disappear, leaving Agnes to be evicted from her own home by the bank. 3 days, Ryder read, his blood turning to ice. He's on a deadline. That's why the pressure is escalating. The timeline had just been brutally shortened. They no longer had the luxury of waiting for the perfect moment. They had to create it. "All right, new plan," Ryder said, turning to Grizz. "We can't wait for her. We have to force his hand. We need to get him out of that house, long enough for us to get in and talk to her. We need to show her that we're real, that there's a way out." Grizz's eyes lit up. Action. Finally. A diversion? A big one, Ryder confirmed. Something he can't ignore. Something that will pull him out of the house and keep him occupied. "I want 2 of our guys prospects on their loudest bikes. Tomorrow, around noon, right when he's there for his lunch break, I want them to break down right in front of his driveway. Loud arguments, revving engines, the whole show. Make it obnoxious. Men like him, with their perfect lawns and quiet streets, they can't stand chaos. He'll come out to play sheriff, and while he's distracted," Grizz grinned, catching on. "You and I go in the back," Ryder finished. "The lock on the back gate is old. Easy to pick. We get in, we talk to her, we show her the proof of what he's doing, and we offer her a way out. Her choice. But she'll be making it with all the facts." It was a high-risk maneuver. If Victor saw them, the whole operation would be blown. But the reverse mortgage had changed the game. They were out of time. That evening, as Ryder was scanning the back of the house one last time before their shift change, he saw it. A tiny flicker of movement. He zoomed the binoculars in, his heart pounding in his chest. There, tied to the rusted latch of the back garden gate, was a small, fluttering strip of red cloth. It looked like it had been torn from an old apron. It was almost invisible against the darkening wood, a tiny flag of rebellion in a kingdom of fear. Agnes had done it. She had found the courage. She was asking for help. A slow, fierce smile spread across Ryder's face. "Grizz," he said, his voice thick with emotion. She did it. The signal. Grizz scrambled over, grabbing his own pair of binoculars. He let out a triumphant laugh. "Well, I'll be damned. The old girl's a fighter. The red cloth wasn't just a signal. It was a validation of his gut feeling, a vindication of his patient strategy. More than that, it was a spark in the darkness, a testament to the unyielding strength of the human spirit. Agnes was not broken. She was bent, bruised, and terrorized, but she was not broken. "Change of plans," Ryder announced, his voice ringing with renewed purpose. "The diversion is still on. But it's no longer about talking to her. It's about getting her out. Tomorrow at noon, we're not knocking. We're liberating." He felt a sense of clarity he hadn't felt in years. The ghost of his sister seemed to recede, replaced by the image of a frail, old woman tying a scrap of red cloth to a gate. It was the bravest thing he had ever seen. The wait was over. The time for subtlety was done. Tomorrow, Victor Sterling's perfect, manicured world was going to be trampled under the steel-toed boots of the Hells Angels. The next morning, the chapel was buzzing with a quiet, focused energy. This wasn't the usual rowdy pre-ride chaos. This was a mission briefing. Ryder stood before a dozen members of his charter, men with names like Wrench, Preacher, and Cannonball. They were a rough-looking crew, a collection of calloused knuckles and hard-won scars, but they were his brothers. He laid out the entire situation, his voice low and even. He told them about Agnes, the bruises, the prison-like house. He told them about Victor, the smiling facade, the financial vampirism, the reverse mortgage. He held up the small digital recorder. "This is him calling his own flesh and blood a senile old woman and a burden," Ryder said, letting the words hang in the air. A low growl rumbled through the assembled bikers. Their code was simple but absolute. They took care of their own, and they protected the vulnerable. An unspoken rule, more binding than any law, was that you don't prey on women, children, or the elderly. Victor had broken that sacred rule. Ryder didn't need to give an order. He just needed to point the way. Grizz and I are the extraction team. We go in the back. Wrench, you're on the lock. I want it open in 10 seconds. Wrench, a wiry mechanic who could disassemble and reassemble a carburetor blindfolded, gave a curt nod. His talent with locks was as renowned as his skill with engines. Two prospects, Jonesy and Pike, Ryder continued, pointing to a pair of young, eager bikers. You two are the diversion. You're on noise detail. Your bikes break down at 11:55 sharp, right in front of the house. Argue. Rev your engines. Be the most obnoxious sons of bitches this neighborhood has ever seen. I want Victor's undivided attention. You keep him on the street until you get the go-ahead from Cannonball. Cannonball, a massive man who served as the club's enforcer, would be the lookout, coordinating via a discreet earpiece. The rest of you are the wall, Ryder said, his gaze sweeping across the remaining men. You'll be parked at both ends of the street. When Victor comes out, you form a perimeter. No one gets in, and he doesn't get back to that house. Not until Agnes is clear. Is that understood? A chorus of gravelly yes and understoods answered him. This isn't about a beatdown, Ryder cautioned, his eyes locking with each man's. This is about extraction and justice. Victor's real punishment will come from the law with a little anonymous push from Rat. Our job is to get her out safely and make sure he understands he can never, ever go near her again. We are shadows. We are professionals. Let's go. The ride to the quiet suburban street was a silent procession. The usual thunder of their Harleys was a low, menacing rumble, a predator stalking its prey. They took their positions with practiced efficiency, melting into the scenery. Ryder, Grizz, and Wrench dismounted a block away and approached the back of Agnes's property on foot, moving through the manicured backyards like ghosts. At 11:55, on the dot, the roar of two poorly tuned motorcycles shattered the midday tranquility. Jonesy and Pike began their performance, a symphony of sputtering engines and shouted, profanity-laced accusations about who forgot to check the oil. It was beautifully, convincingly chaotic. As predicted, the front door of Agnes's house flew open. Victor Sterling stormed out, his face a mask of incandescent rage. "What in God's name do you think you're doing?" he shrieked, his voice cracking with fury. "This is a private community. Get that junk off my street." This was their window. "Go," Ryder whispered into his radio. Wrench was already at the back gate. The old lock, rusted and weak, gave way with a soft click in under 5 seconds. They slipped into the backyard, a space as sterile and unloved as the house's interior. The red cloth was still there, a tiny beacon of defiance. Ryder gently untied it and tucked it into his pocket. Grizz covered the back door while Wrench went to work on the lock. This one was newer, more secure, but Wrench's tension tools moved with the grace of surgeon scalpels. A series of soft clicks, and the door was open. Ryder took a deep breath, the ghost of his sister whispering a final warning in his ear. "Don't fail. Not again." He pushed the door open and stepped inside. The house was cold, filled with the scent of bleach and fear. He found Agnes in the living room, huddled in a threadbare armchair, her hands clasped together so tightly her knuckles were white. She looked up as he entered, her eyes wide with a mixture of terror and dawning hope. She recognized him. "Ryder," she breathed, the name a fragile prayer. Grizz and Wrench secured the entry point, their presence a silent, formidable promise of protection. Ryder knelt in front of her, his large frame seeming to shrink to make himself less intimidating. He removed his leather gloves, revealing the tattooed hand she'd seen before. "Agnes," he said, his voice softer than he thought possible. "We got your signal. We're getting you out of here." Right now, tears welled in her eyes, spilling down her wrinkled cheeks. They weren't tears of sadness, but of profound, earth-shattering relief. "He said he was going to send me away," she whispered, her voice trembling. "He's taking the house. We know," Ryder said gently. "We know everything. But that's over now. His world is about to fall apart. But first, we need to get you somewhere safe." Outside, the drama was escalating. Victor, puffed up with self-importance and rage, was screaming at the two prospects, threatening to have them arrested. As he turned to stomp back to his house to call the police, he found his path blocked. From both ends of the street, a dozen Hell's Angels had silently moved into position, forming a semicircle of leather, denim, and steel. They just stood there, arms crossed, their faces impassive. They didn't say a word. They didn't have to. The message was clear. Victor stopped dead, his face draining of all color. The bravado evaporated, replaced by a primal, stammering fear. He had gone from being the king of his tiny, cruel kingdom to a mouse cornered by a pack of wolves. He looked from one impassive biker to the next, his gaze finally landing on Cannonball, whose sheer size seemed to blot out the sun. Victor had made a terrible, terrible mistake. Back inside, Ryder held out his hand to Agnes. "Are you ready to go?" She looked at his outstretched hand, then back at the sterile room that had been her prison. For a moment, she hesitated, the conditioning of fear holding her in its grip. Then, with a deep, shuddering breath, she placed her small, frail hand in his. It was a leap of faith. "Yes," she said, her voice stronger now. "Yes, I am." Ryder's hand closed around hers, warm and secure. It was a promise. As he helped her to her feet, the years of guilt he'd carried for Sarah began to feel a little lighter. He couldn't save his sister, but he would be damned if he didn't save Agnes. The rescue was on. Leading Agnes towards the back door felt like escorting a queen from her dungeon. Each step she took away from the threadbare armchair was a victory. Grizz held the door open, a grim smile on his face as he watched them approach. Wrench had already slipped back out, a silent wraith ensuring their exit path was clear. "You're doing great, Agnes," Ryder said, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm of emotions. Just a few more feet, they stepped out into the bright sunlight of the backyard, and Agnes blinked, as if seeing the sun for the first time in years. The air was fresh, filled with the scent of cut grass and the distant, satisfying sound of Victor's impotent shouting. It was the scent of freedom. Their transport wasn't a bike. It was the discreet surveillance van, now repurposed as a getaway vehicle, parked in the alley behind the house. As Grizz helped Agnes into the passenger seat, Ryder paused and looked back at the house one last time. It looked so normal, so peaceful. A perfect lie. He felt a surge of cold fury at the deception, at the evil that could hide in such plain sight. He got into the driver's seat and keyed the ignition. The van rumbled to life. "Everyone clear?" He spoke into his radio. "Clear, Prez," came Cannonball's voice. "The package is secure. What about the trash?" "Leave him," Ryder commanded. "Let him stew. Let him wonder what just happened. His real problems are just getting started." With that, he put the van in gear and pulled away from the curb, leaving the house, the neighborhood, and Agnes's prison behind. In the passenger seat, Agnes was silent, her hands clutching a small, worn handbag, the only thing she'd brought with her. She stared out the window, her expression unreadable. Ryder worried for a moment that the shock was too much. "Agnes," he asked gently, "are you okay?" She turned to him, and for the first time, a small, genuine smile touched her lips. The fear in her eyes was still there, a faint shadow, but it was being eclipsed by a dawning light of pure, unadulterated relief. "I haven't felt the sun on my face in 2 years," she said, her voice thick with unshed tears. He kept the curtains drawn, said the light faded the furniture, the casual cruelty of it hit Ryder like a physical blow. It wasn't just about money. It was about control, about extinguishing her light piece by piece. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. Meanwhile, back on the street, the show was over. As Ryder's van disappeared, Cannonball gave a signal. The wall of bikers parted. The two prospects, Jonesy and Pike, miraculously managed to get their bikes started. With a final, deafening roar of their engines, they sped off, leaving Victor alone in the middle of the street. He stood there, trembling, his perfect suit now rumpled, his face pale with sweat and confusion. The silence that descended was more terrifying than the noise. His fortress had been breached. He didn't know how or by whom, but he knew something was terribly wrong. He sprinted back to his front door, fumbling with his keys. He burst inside, shouting Agnes's name. The house was silent. The living room was empty. The threadbare armchair where he'd left her was vacant. Panic, cold and absolute, seized him. He ran through the house, his carefully constructed world crumbling with every empty room he checked. She was gone. Not only was she gone, but a small, laminated card had been left on the center of the dining room table. He picked it up with a shaking hand. It was a business card. On it was a simple, elegant logo for a law firm specializing in elder abuse, and a handwritten note. "We'll be in touch." It was a calculated piece of psychological warfare, a parting shot from Rat. They hadn't laid a hand on him, but they had utterly dismantled his sense of control. He had no idea who had taken her, but he knew they were smart, organized, and they knew what he had done. The threat of biker violence was one thing. He could have painted that as a random attack. But this was strategic. This was a scalpel, not a sledgehammer. His mind raced. The reverse mortgage, the bank accounts, the forged signatures. His carefully built house of cards was about to come tumbling down. He sank into a chair, his head in his hands, the silence of the empty house screaming at him. The bikers hadn't needed to throw a punch. They had simply taken away his victim, his source of income, and his power, leaving him alone with his crimes and the certainty of impending doom. Ryder drove Agnes not to the clubhouse, but to a small, clean apartment the club kept for emergencies, a safe house. It was run by Maria, preacher's wife, a warm, no-nonsense woman with kind eyes and a will of iron. She greeted Agnes at the door with a gentle smile and a warm blanket. "Welcome, dear," Maria said, wrapping the blanket around Agnes's thin shoulders. "You're safe now. Let's get you a cup of tea." As Maria led Agnes inside, Ryder watched them go. He saw the way Agnes leaned into Maria's warmth, the way her shoulders, which had been hunched in fear for years, finally began to relax. He had done it. He had kept his promise to himself, to Sarah's memory. Grizz came and stood beside him, clapping a heavy hand on his shoulder. "Good work, brother," Grizz said, his voice uncharacteristically soft. "You did right by her." "We did right by her," Ryder corrected. This victory didn't belong to him alone. It belonged to the Brotherhood. It belonged to Wrench's steady hands, to Rat's brilliant mind, to the prospect's loud pipes, and to the silent, intimidating wall of his men. And most of all, it belonged to Agnes and the small scrap of red cloth that started it all. Later that evening, an anonymous, data-heavy email was sent from a public library computer miles away. It landed in the inboxes of the local police department's fraud division, the IRS, and the state's adult protective services. The email contained scanned copies of forged documents, detailed bank statements showing the systematic draining of Agnes's accounts, a list of Victor's gambling debts, and a high-quality audio file of Victor verbally abusing his aunt. The package was neat, undeniable, and utterly devastating. The wheels of traditional justice, though slow, had been given a powerful, anonymous shove. The Hells Angels had delivered the gasoline, just as Ryder had planned. Now all they had to do was wait for the spark. Ryder finally returned to the chapel late that night. The atmosphere was different now, relaxed, triumphant. He was greeted with raised bottles and nods of respect. He accepted a beer from the bar and walked back to his office, the weight on his shoulders feeling significantly lighter. He took the small, red piece of cloth from his pocket and laid it on his desk. It looked like nothing, a worthless scrap. But to him, it was a medal, a symbol of a promise kept, a reminder that sometimes the most heroic acts don't involve throwing a punch, but simply showing up, listening, and offering a hand to someone who has forgotten what it feels like to be safe. He had faced his own ghost today and had not flinched. The scales were finally starting to balance. The days that followed the rescue were a period of quiet, profound healing for Agnes. Under Maria's gentle care at the safe house apartment, she began to bloom. The first thing to return was her appetite. The single, sad sandwich Victor had provided was replaced by Maria's hearty stews, fresh-baked bread, and endless cups of sweet tea. She ate with a quiet, almost reverent gratitude, savoring every bite. Color returned to her cheeks. She began to sleep through the night, free from the fear of Victor's footsteps in the hall or his angry voice berating her. The deep-set lines of anxiety around her eyes began to soften. Maria took her shopping, not for necessities but for simple joys. They bought a soft, cashmere sweater in a bright blue, a novel from a local bookstore, and a small pot of vibrant purple violets for her windowsill. Each small choice, each item she was allowed to pick for herself, was a step in reclaiming her own life. "He never let me have flowers," Agnes confided in Maria one afternoon, her fingers gently stroking a velvety petal. "He said they were a waste of money and attracted bugs." Maria just squeezed her hand. "Well, this place is going to look like a botanical garden by the time we're done," she declared with a warm smile. The bikers became her unlikely family. Grizz would stop by with pastries from the best bakery in town, sitting with her for hours while she told him stories about her late husband, a decorated war veteran. Wrench fixed the wobbly leg on her kitchen table and installed a new, brighter light fixture, refusing any payment and just grumbling that he hates a wobble. Even the young prospects, Jonesy and Pike, would visit, sitting awkwardly on the sofa while Agnes insisted on serving them cookies, their boisterous energy softened into gentle respect in her presence. They treated her not as a victim, but as a matriarch, the respected elder of their strange, leather-clad tribe. Ryder visited every other day. Their conversations were often quiet, filled with comfortable silences. He never pushed her to talk about Victor, but one day she brought it up herself. "I feel so foolish," she said, her gaze distant. "I let him do that to me for so long. I knew it was wrong, but I was so scared. Scared of being alone, scared of what he would do." Ryder sat opposite her, his large frame filling the small armchair. He thought of his sister, of the shame and fear that had kept her silent. "Agnes," he said, his voice firm but kind, "you have nothing to be foolish about. Fear is a cage. It's not your fault that he built it, and it's not your fault you couldn't find the key. The bravest thing in the world is to ask for help when you're locked in. And you did that. You saved yourself. We just opened the door." His words were a balm on her wounded pride. She looked at him, her blue eyes clear and steady. "Thank you, Ryder, for seeing me any time, Agnes," he replied, a genuine warmth spreading through his chest. Meanwhile, the second phase of Ryder's plan was playing out with beautiful precision. 2 days after the anonymous email, 2 detectives from the Financial Crimes Unit showed up at Victor Sterling's office. The visit was quiet, professional, but it sent a shockwave through his workplace. The next day, his assets were frozen pending an investigation. The leased Mercedes was repossessed from the parking lot of his firm in the middle of the day, a humiliating public spectacle. He was suspended from his job. The bookie he owed money to, having heard through the grapevine that Victor's cash flow had suddenly dried up, started making threatening calls. Victor's life was imploding. He was trapped, isolated, and terrified, a perfect mirror of the existence he had forced upon Agnes. The final blow came a week later. Armed with a warrant and the mountain of evidence Rat had provided, the police arrested Victor at Agnes's house, which he had been illegally occupying. They let him out in handcuffs, his tailored suit rumpled, his face a mask of disbelief and ruin. The neighbor he had once smiled and waved at Watch from her lawn, her expression one of shocked disdain. The news report that evening showed him being escorted into a police car, a reporter narrating the long list of charges: fraud, forgery, theft, and elder abuse. Ryder made sure Agnes was watching. She sat on the sofa, Maria on one side, Grizz on the other. As the image of Victor, defeated and exposed, filled the screen, she didn't cheer. She didn't smile. A single tear traced a path down her cheek. "It's over," she whispered. "It's really over." Ryder, standing in the doorway, simply nodded. Justice had been served. With Victor's assets frozen, the fraudulent reverse mortgage was halted and voided. The club's lawyer, a sharp-tongued man who owed Ryder a significant favor, stepped in on Agnes's behalf. He worked pro bono to untangle the financial mess, ensuring the house was firmly and irrevocably secured in her name. They even managed to claw back a portion of the stolen funds from an account Victor had tried to hide. Agnes had a choice to make. She could return to her house, the scene of her long imprisonment, or she could start fresh. "I can't go back there," she told Ryder, her voice firm. "That's his house now. It's filled with his ghosts, not mine." Ryder understood completely. The club helped her sell the house quickly and for a good price. With the proceeds and the recovered funds, Agnes was not just secure, she was comfortable. She bought a bright, sunny condominium in a retirement community on the other side of town, a place with social activities, a swimming pool, and, most importantly, no memory of Victor. The day she moved in, it wasn't a professional moving company that showed up. It was a dozen Hells Angels. They carried her boxes, assembled her furniture, and hung her pictures with a surprising gentleness. Cannonball, the fearsome enforcer, spent an hour meticulously arranging her new collection of potted flowers on her balcony. The sight of these huge, tattooed men carefully placing her delicate china in a cabinet was a surreal, heartwarming spectacle for her new neighbors. They had torn down her prison, and now they were helping her build her new sanctuary. The transformation was complete. The frail, frightened woman Ryder had met on the street was gone, replaced by a vibrant, smiling matriarch with a mischievous twinkle in her eye and a biker gang for a family. She had found her voice, her strength, and her freedom. Several months later, the autumn chill had given way to the warmth of a late spring. Agnes's new life had settled into a comfortable, joyful rhythm. Her condominium was filled with light, laughter, and a constant, delicious smell of baking. She had become the unofficial grandmother to the Serpent's Crest charter. At least once a week, a procession of roaring Harleys would pull up to her community, much to the initial alarm and eventual bemused acceptance of the other residents, as the bikers came to pay their respects and, more importantly, to get a share of her legendary apple crumble. She knew all their real names, their wives' names, their children's birthdays. She knitted a blanket for Wrench's new baby. She listened to preacher practice his Sunday sermons. She gave the young prospect Jonesy, stern but loving advice about a girl he was trying to impress. She had gone from being a burden to being the heart of a brotherhood. Ryder found himself making excuses to ride out to her side of town more and more often. He would find her on her balcony, tending to her flourishing garden, a picture of contentment. Today, he found her sitting in a comfortable chair, a half-finished scarf, and knitting needles in her lap, watching the sunset paint the sky in hues of orange and pink. He pulled up a chair beside her, accepting the glass of iced tea she offered without a word. For a while, they just sat in silence, watching the day end. "I heard from the lawyer today," Agnes said quietly, breaking the silence. "Victor took a plea bargain. He'll be in prison for at least 10 years, Ryder nodded slowly. "That's good news, is it?" she mused, her gaze far away. "I suppose it is. It's justice. But I don't feel happy about it. I just feel quiet. I pity him. To have so much and to be so empty inside that you have to steal from an old woman to feel powerful, her capacity for empathy, even for the man who had tormented her, was astounding. It was a strength Ryder was still trying to understand. "You're a better person than me, Agnes," he admitted, his voice a low rumble. "All I feel is satisfaction that he's in a cage now, just like the one he built for you. That's because you're a protector, Ryder," she said, turning to look at him, her eyes full of a grandmother's wisdom. "You see the wolf, and you want to put down. I just see a pathetic, hungry animal. But we both know it can't be allowed to roam free." She reached over and placed her hand on his tattooed arm. "You carry a great weight, don't you? It's not just about the club. It's something older. A sadness the ghost of his sister, Sarah, flickered in his mind. He rarely spoke of her, the wound still too raw, too deep. But here, in the peaceful quiet of Agnes's balcony, the words came unbidden. "My sister," he said, the admission costing him more than he expected. "She was in a situation like yours, with a man like Victor. I was young, arrogant, too busy with club business to see the signs. I didn't listen when she tried to ask for help. By the time I understood, it was too late. He didn't need to say more." Agnes understood perfectly. Her hand squeezed his arm, a silent gesture of profound compassion. "Oh, my dear boy," she whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You can't carry that. It wasn't your fault. I was the one who found her," he continued, the confession a release of a pressure he'd held inside for a decade. "I promised myself then that I would never be too busy again, that I would never, ever ignore the signs, Agnes was silent for a long moment, absorbing the weight of his pain. Then saving me, she said softly. Wasn't just about me, was it? It was about her too, yeah. He breathed out, the word a heavy sigh. I guess it was. Then let her rest, Ryder, Agnes said, her voice gentle but firm. You kept your promise. You listened. You saw me. You did for me what you couldn't do for her. You balanced the scales. There is no more debt to pay. He looked at her, at this incredible, resilient woman who had survived hell and emerged with her grace intact. In her eyes, he didn't see pity. He saw understanding. He saw absolution. For the first time in 10 years, the crushing weight on his soul seemed to lift just a little. The ghost of his sister didn't vanish, but her image in his mind seemed to change. Instead of the tragic figure on the floor, he saw her as she was before, laughing, vibrant, and full of life. Maybe Agnes was right. Maybe the scales were finally balanced. Grizz and a few of the other guys arrived then, their engines a familiar, comforting thunder. They brought pizza and beer, and the quiet balcony was soon filled with their rough laughter and easy camaraderie. Ryder watched as Agnes held court, scolding Grizz for his language one moment and patting Cannonball's arm affectionately the next. She belonged here. She was one of them. He realized then that in saving Agnes, he hadn't just rescued a woman from a monster. He had rescued a piece of his own humanity. She had given him back something he thought he had lost forever, a sense of peace. The Hell's Angels had stunned the town, not with violence or intimidation, but with a quiet, ferocious act of kindness. They had reminded everyone that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear leather, ride Harleys, and show up when you need them most. As the sun finally dipped below the horizon, casting the world in a soft, forgiving light, Ryder raised his beer bottle in a silent toast. To Agnes, to Sarah, and to the unbreakable bonds of a brotherhood that had become a family. The roar of their engines was no longer a sound of menace. It was the sound of protection, a promise that as long as the Serpent's Crest rode, the vulnerable would never be truly alone. Everyone has a role to play in the fight against injustice, even if it's just offering to carry someone's groceries. If this story of unlikely heroes and incredible resilience moved you, share it with your friends. Comment below with your own thoughts on what makes a true hero, and let's continue to support survivors of abuse everywhere. Your voice, like a scrap of red cloth on a fence, can be a more powerful signal than you know.